What's up guys, hope you're having a good day. In this video we're going to be breaking down all of the main card fights from this weekend's UFC Fight Night Krylov versus Ryan Spann card. This is a really good event this weekend, loads of interesting matchups, and if you like the breakdowns in this YouTube video, don't forget that you can go on over to my website MMABettingTips.com and watch breakdown videos for all the prelim fights on this card too. I take a really deep dive into every single matchup on this card, so if you're betting the fights this weekend, I hope you're going to find the information shared today in this YouTube video very useful, and also find the information on my website very useful as well. Check out the link in the description below to head on over to my website MMABettingTips.com. On there I also share all my bets for every UFC event, and also if you would like to join my live betting group, there are a few spaces still available, not many spaces left. It is almost sold out. It is sold out for most of the year, but towards the year, beginning of this year, there's a few spaces available. So if you'd like to find out more about live betting, if you'd like to join live betting, just come to my website MMABettingTips.com, roll the mouse over where it says betting tips, click live betting tips, and you're good to go. I'll also be dropping a breakdown video for the fight between Jake Paul and Tommy Fury tomorrow, which is Friday. So come back to my YouTube channel, keep an eye open for that. And yeah, man, I'm going to be betting the Jake Paul versus Tommy Fury fight this weekend, so be sure to check out the breakdown video, or I give you my thoughts on how I think that fight is very likely to play out. But for now, let's get into what you're all here for, which is breaking down the first fight on the main card, which is going to be Eric Gonzalez against the debutant Trevor Peek. So as ever, we will start off by taking a look at the odds on this one, and we can see that Trevor Peek is a relatively big favourite at average odds of around 1.50, which is going to be minus 200 for an implied probability of 67%. If we take a look at the odds on his opponent, where are his odds? Mr. Gonzalez, he is around an average of, say, 2.70, which is going to be plus 170 for an implied probability of 37%. So Gonzalez is 31 years old, 5'11", with a 75-inch reach, and Trevor Peek is 28 years old, 5'9", with a 70-inch reach. So in terms of the tail of the tape, both guys roughly the same age. You can see a very nice 5-inch reach advantage for Gonzalez, which is a significant reach advantage, but he doesn't use it particularly well. On top of that, Peek is a lot more powerful, and I don't think Gonzalez has got the power in his hands to get respect from Peek in there. So I do think Gonzalez is going to find it difficult to use that reach to stop Peek from coming forward, getting inside, and forcing him to get into big exchanges. However, having a 5-inch reach advantage is certainly nice against someone like Peek, who's very aggressive and likes to pressure you. So this is an interesting matchup because it's really a clash of styles. With Trevor Peek, you've got a guy who is very aggressive, he's very wild, he's very dangerous, and as soon as the fight starts, he just comes to look out the gate, looks to come out the gate very fast and force you to engage from the very first second. Gonzalez, on the other hand, is one of these guys that likes to spread his output out more across the 15 minutes. He's not particularly powerful. He's not particularly dangerous. He's not particularly good at anything, really. He's kind of a jack of all trades, master of none. But he does have the ability to perform, I feel, closer to his full potential for an entire 15-minute fight than someone like Peek, who is much more likely to burn themselves out, early in a matchup, trying to go for the kill. So Peek is one of these guys that will throw everything at you from the first second and bank on his chin, his toughness, his durability, being able to outlast you, basically. He banks on his ability to push you so hard to the point that when he's tired and he's hurt, you're going to be a lot more tired and a lot more hurt. But we know, as you start to face these higher level fighters in the UFC, this becomes a more difficult strategy to employ, because when you're facing guys who are relatively low level on the regional circuit, you can overwhelm them with aggression and pressure. But as you start to face these higher level of opponents, they are a lot more experienced. It's not as easy to phase them. It's not as easy to overwhelm them. and they're far better at weathering that early storm and take you into deep waters where guys like Trevor Peek can kind of struggle. A really good example of this would be Terence McKinney. When he was facing, these lower level guys outside of the UFC, he was smoking everyone within a couple of minutes. But as soon as he came to the UFC, of course, he's got a few wins, very, very quickly in the first few minutes of round one. But as he started to face the Drew Dobers, the Bonfins, you could see that he really started to struggle when guys would not panic in the face of his reckless, wild aggression. They would just stay calm, weather the storm, drag him into the second and third round, where obviously we've seen him struggle pretty bad. And I feel Trevor Peek is likely going to be one of those guys. The question is whether Eric Gonzalez is at the level required to make him pay. And that's really the crux of the decision you've got to make if you want to bet this fight. You have to basically work out whether Gonzalez is going to be able to exploit Peek's biggest weakness, because it is there. Gonzalez just may not be able to, may not be good enough to make him pay. So we could talk about how these guys match up from a stylistic point of view, but ultimately I think that's basically what it boils down to. Now, what I'm going to do is play some footage of Peek in the background here in his fight against Karma Worthy, which took place back in August 2022, so that as I'm kind of describing how these two match up from a striking and grappling point of view, you can take a look at exactly what I mean in terms of him being extremely aggressive early and the kind of guy that is pretty likely to adrenaline dump. So Peek obviously in the blue gloves here. And what you'll notice about Peek, we'll focus a lot on striking here because, both Gonzalez and Peek are stand-up fighters, so you would expect this fight, for the most part, to take place on the feet. What you can see very early on is he's very aggressive, right? We're only 30 seconds into the first round, and already you can see, look at the heaviness of his kicks, even that leg kick. These are not, small range-finding kicks. You can see he throws everything into his kick there, which spins him off balance. Everything that Peek throws is to try and kill you. So we know from how much he's loading up on these kicks, from how much he's digging in with these kicks, we know that he's throwing absolute maximum power, everything that he's got, into every single strike that he throws. So we know that he does not have an efficient style of fighting. We know that he is the kind of guy that, because he throws so much energy into everything, he's very likely to burn himself out. And you can really see that here, right? Every kick he throws is to try and cut you in half. Every single punch he throws, he loads up with full power. Even that takedown picks you up in the air, slams you on the ground. But what we know about guys that fight like Peek is because they put so much energy into everything that they throw, they do have a tendency to burn themselves out pretty quickly. And that is certainly going to be the case with Peek. But when you've got a guy this aggressive early, it is very, very easy to get caught cold, flat-footed, like a rabbit in the headlights, eat a big shot, and get yourself knocked out, which is the reason why, if you look at Peek's record, he's got so many wins by first-round knockout. And this is because when you come out this aggressive, if you're not experienced, if you're not calm and relaxed, and you're able to kind of, hang in there when you're hurt and a guy is really trying to take you out, it's easy to get overwhelmed. But look what happens. We're now, 2 minutes, and we're about, 2.5 minutes into this round, and we've seen all that reckless aggression from Peek early in round one, and now look at his body language. That kick has got nowhere near as much drive on it. He's flat-footed now. His mouth is standing open wide. His body language is completely changed. And you can see just 3 minutes into this fight, Peek is already looking very flat-footed and very tired. His volume's fallen off a cliff. Look how bad he looks defensively. He's quite sloppy. Even as he steps in with that jab there, you can see his hand speed has dipped. So Peek is the exact kind of guy that is very, very prone to adrenaline dumping. Very, very prone to, being absolutely gassed out of his mind in round two. Even this position here tells a big story. So in the first 3 minutes of round one, he had the energy to literally pick Karma Worthy up and throw him on the ground, right, with those big slams. But now look, when Peak gets in on the legs and hips of Worthy here, grabbing hold of a single leg, look at how easily Karma Worthy neutralizes this position with these underhooks. So he's got one underhook there on the right side, gets an underhook on the left side, and now Peak doesn't have the energy to just drive in on his legs and hips anymore and pick him up and throw him on the ground. Instead, he's got to resort to trying to out-hustle Karma Worthy against the cage in this clinch position. But look at how easily now Worthy's able to defend himself with those underhooks. Peak isn't getting near a takedown anymore. And you can see there's a real flatness, a real sloppiness to everything Peak does. Even these uppercuts to the body, maybe hooks to the body, I don't know what you want to call these. But you can see they haven't got the same hand speed on these shots as the punches he was throwing just 4 minutes ago. So you can see Peak is a guy that is going to get significantly worse with every single minute that passes. You can see there, the head strikes don't have as much pop on him, don't have as much hand speed. And I'm rambling on and I'm continuing to talk because this fight's almost over and I want you to see the finish, which comes in about 30 seconds from now, believe it or not, even though Peak has managed to get a takedown here. We'll just skip through. Worthy's able to scramble back up to his feet. And again, look at the body language here from Peak. So we're only 4.5 minutes into this fight, but as Worthy pops back up to his feet, look at the body language from Peak. Watch, as they separate, he's flat-footed, hands down by his side, and he takes a big visible deep breath. You can see this guy's very tired. Watch. Big deep breath there. Big deep breath. And then he's like, right, 20 seconds left to go. I'm going to finish strong. Starts wailing on Karma Worthy against the cage and lands a big right hand and knocks him out. But you can see that Peak's style of fighting is very unsustainable. And he's fought like that in every single one of his 7 career fights so far. He caught Karma Worthy, knocked him out at the end of round 1. That's great. At the end of the day, it's a results business. But you know that if Karma Worthy could have survived until the end of that first round, I think life would have got a lot more difficult for Peak into the second and third. The problem is, no one has been able to really hang in there with Peak for long enough to make him pay. If you go back watch his Contender Series fight, he was really tired in the second round against Malik Lewis and got a second round finish. But the reason being, because he pushed such a high pace, Lewis was actually more tired than he was, and that's where Peak was able to use his doggedness, his toughness, not even a word, his toughness to kind of outlast and outwork Lewis. So Gonzalez, from a technical point of view, doesn't have any huge advantages over Peak. It's not like he's a better striker, it's not like he's a better grappler, but he is more experienced. He does have over 20 pro fights, so it's not going to be as easy to overwhelm Gonzalez as many of Peak's past opponents. You can see quite inexperienced, apart from of course Karma Worthy, who also has over 20 pro fights. But aside from that, you look at the records of these guys, Gonzalez is a lot more experienced. He's got a good gas tank. He is probably more well positioned than anyone else Peak has faced apart from Karma Worthy to weather that early storm. And so yeah, from a betting point of view, Peak is likely to do very, very well early on, but the longer the fight goes, the worse it gets from him. Or worse it gets for him, sorry. So, what does that mean from a betting point of view? Well, it does make this fight pretty difficult, because when you look at the odds on this matchup, Peak deserves to be the favourite because he is very dangerous early on. If you look at Gonzalez's record, he's not immune to getting knocked out early. He's been knocked out early in his last 2 fights against Terrence McKinney and Jim Miller. And what's interesting is Peak's style is very similar to Terrence McKinney's. He might not be as athletic or explosive as McKinney, but he certainly comes out the gate just as hard. And we can see that, Peak was caught early and submitted by McKinney. And, you could definitely see... Gonzalez was caught early by McKinney and submitted. You could definitely see Peak doing the same thing. So there's a very real risk that Gonzalez gets caught with something early on and gets finished early with how dangerous, how aggressive Peak is. So I do agree that Peak should be the favourite, but in my opinion, this is one of those situations where you gotta be pretty nuts to bet Peak at these odds, in my opinion, because in order to get any value here, you've got to give Peak a better than 67% chance of winning. And when we know he's probably only got one good round in him and he's going to look very, very tired in round 2, for me it's very difficult to find value there. Does that mean there's value on Gonzalez? I mean, not necessarily. Like I say, he's not great. He is more capable of performing closer to his full potential for the full 15 minutes. But Peak's an absolute dog. You know, it's not like Gonzalez is going to totally outclass him into the second round. Maybe outclass him in the third when Peak is totally gassed. But I would expect Peak to win the first round big. Round 2 to be relatively competitive, and then if it goes as far as round 3, then I do think Gonzalez would win the third. So I don't think either of these guys are a particularly strong position for you to put your money. I would pass on this one, but obviously you can use the information I've shared with you in this video combined with your own research to make your own decision on that. Please leave a comment below and let me know what you think. So in terms of the over-under on this one, you can see that, no surprise, fight not to go to a decision is at steep favourite odds. I definitely wouldn't be betting on this fight to go to a decision, not with the way Trevor Peak fights, not with the way Gonzalez has been finished very early in his last 2. I do think a finish is very likely here. I wouldn't be betting this though. These odds don't get me excited, but I do think this fight ends inside the distance a very, very high percentage of the time. Unfortunately, that is reflected in the odds. The odds are exactly where they should be, which, you know, they're going to be for the majority of bets. You know, bookies didn't get fucking rich by setting inaccurate odds. Newsflash. So, with props on this fight, obviously some of the most likely ones are Peak to win by knockout or TKO, but the odds on that, pretty awful. I would not be touching the odds on that. Very short odds for a prop bet. When it comes to props, I would be more inclined, if you really want to, you know, someone said in the YouTube comments last week, I bet for entertainment, I bet for fun. And I need to remember that, right? A lot of the time when people place props, they're placing props to make watching the fight a bit more interesting, watching the fight more entertaining. So I don't like any of the props on this fight from a value betting point of view, from a position of actually making money. But I do think an interesting bet on this fight is Gonzalez to win by decision at 8.0 plus 700, because I think Peak's tough enough to not get finished by Gonzalez. But I do think if Gonzalez weathers the early storm, there's a decent chance he'll finish strong. And I do think there's a decent chance this fight will go the distance as like a contrarian view on this matchup. So if you wanted to sprinkle a little bit of money just to make watching this fight more interesting, I do think Gonzalez by decision plus 700, 8.0. It's interesting to me. I'm not going to be betting it, but that's probably the most interesting prop. Is it most likely to win? Is it particularly likely to win? No and no. But it gives you a better risk to reward ratio than betting on something that's super steep odds like Peak to win by knockout or TKO at 2.0 plus 110, which is the most likely outcome if we're being real. So let's break down the next fight. Now let's move on to the next one, which is Mike Malott versus Johan Lainesse, the Battle of the Canadians. So if we start off by taking a look at the odds on this one, we can see that these guys are in a similar odds range to Gonzalez and Trevor Peak, with Mike Malott being the favourite at average odds of around 1.45, which is going to be minus 222 for an implied probability of 69%. If we take a look at the odds on his opponent, Lainesse, he is around an average of 2.80, which is going to be plus 180 for an implied probability of 36%. So, Mike Malott, 31 years old, 6'1" with a 73-inch reach, which is quite unfortunate. That is a very short reach for someone that is 6'1". But Lainesse is 30 years old, 6'1", and he's got a reach more synonymous with the height of 6'1", 76 inches. So he has a slight 3-inch reach advantage, but a 3-inch reach advantage is not too notable, so it probably won't have the biggest influence on this matchup. So it's a very interesting fight, this, and I really feel that this matchup is going to come down to cardio, because both these guys have got a tendency to slow down a lot as the fight wears on. So what we're going to get from these two, I would imagine, is a pretty fast, pretty aggressive start. And then both of them will tire out and become very sloppy into the second and third round. And this matchup will be won by the fighter who performs better tired, ultimately. And based on past performances, it's very difficult to predict who that's going to be. With Mike Malott, it's difficult to predict who that is going to be because there's a real lack of footage available on him going deep in fights. So as you can see, this was a grappling match. This was a grappling match. And so every single one of his MMA fights dating back to 2017 has ended in round 1. The last time we saw Malott go the distance was all the way back in 2015. So that was, almost 8 years ago now. 7.5 years ago. And he did gas pretty bad in that fight. He looked absolutely awful in rounds 2 and 3. Reason why it ended in majority decision was because Malott started really well in round 1 and then struggled into the second and third round. So the problem we've got here is the only fight in Malott's entire career that went the distance, the only MMA fight that went the distance, he gassed pretty bad. Now, there's multiple ways that you can look at this. You can look at it and you can go, okay, Malott hasn't got the cardio to go 3 hard rounds. You can look at it that way because the only evidence we've got of how Malott looks in a fight that goes the distance is that he looked bad. You could look at it the other way and you could say the reason why he gassed in his fight back in 2015 was because he was very inexperienced and he didn't know how to pace himself. 1, 2, 3, 4 pro fights up until the time he faced Diana in Bellator all ended in round 1. So he gassed in this matchup because he just didn't know how to pace himself, right? And since then, he may have learned how to pace himself. His cardio might be a lot better. We just haven't seen it because every single one of his fights since then has ended in round 1. So you've got to keep an open mind on it. At the end of the day, all we could do is make the best decision possible, the information we've got available. Do I think it's very likely Malott still has cardio issues? I do. Just because he hasn't had, real life experience in UFC fights to pace himself over 3 rounds. He's only ever been to a decision once. We can only bet based on the information we've got. His cardio didn't look great in the one fight that went the distance. But we've got to keep an open mind on it. With Lainesse, he also slows down a lot as fights wear on. But the reason why Lainesse and Malott slow down tend to be for very different reasons. So Malott tends to slow because he comes out the gate very hard, very aggressive early, and commits so much energy to everything that he does early on. Doesn't pace himself particularly well. So maybe he's learned to pace himself now, but based on past performances, doesn't appear that he has. The reason why Lainesse slows as fights wear on is that he's similar to Peak in many ways, in that even though he's not as aggressive as Peak, he does throw absolutely everything into everything that he throws. So he doesn't have an efficient style of striking. He's not like Peak in the sense that Peak is like a berserker, right? Peak is a lunatic. He just goes flat out, non-stop, red lines his sprints. Lainesse isn't like that, but he is like Peak in the sense that, how Peak really loads up on all his power punches, throws everything into his kicks. Lainesse is the same. There's a real power, a real heaviness about everything that he does, but that power comes at a cost. And obviously, guys that do throw a lot into every shot, they have a tendency to burn themselves out, relatively quickly or a lot quicker than someone that is, more technical. Throws a lot more range finding strikes, a lot more volume strikes. Lainesse, again, the kind of guy that everything that he throws is to try and kill you. So this is an interesting matchup because you've got two guys that do get a lot worse as the fight wears on. Malott, because he comes out the gate very hard early, burns himself out. Lainesse throws everything into every shot, has a tendency again to burn himself out. So if we ask ourselves the question, who is more likely to perform better late on? I do think the answer to that question is Lainesse. And that basically comes down to experience, right? He's got more experience fighting tired. There's not a great difference in the number of pro fights both guys have had. In fact, both guys have got exactly the same number of pro fights, but the difference is Lainesse has faced a higher level of competition. He's also spent a lot more time in fights, you know, feeling what it's like to compete tired against someone, you know, across from you in the octagon that's trying to kill you. He's gone the distance in CFFC. You know, he's gone deep with Gabe Green and also Darian Weeks. So Lainesse knows what it feels like to go deep and be tired and keep pushing. Whereas, you know, the second and third round for the most part are going to be virgin territory for Malott. Certainly against the level of competition he's facing in Lainesse. So if we consider how these two match up from a stylistic point of view, Malott does hit very hard. He's very aggressive on the feet, but he doesn't move as well as Lainesse when it comes to striking. He's a lot wilder. He's a lot scrappier. He's a lot more raw. Lainesse has good footwork, good movement, big power in his hands, a lot better defensively. He's much more technical than Malott. When it comes to grappling, though, Malott is a much better grappler. Good offensive wrestling, heavy top game, good grappling control. Lainesse's takedown offense isn't great. It's difficult to hold him down early because of how big and strong he is, but if you do wear him out a bit, if you do get him tired, he becomes easier to take down and hold down, which, you know, is pretty big considering Malott comes out the gate very hard in round one, may be able to wear Lainesse out with grappling, and then it'll become easier to take Lainesse down into that second and third round. So it's an interesting fight, a matchup that I think could definitely go either way. From a betting point of view, what does all this stuff mean? Personally, if I was betting this fight, I'm not going to bet this fight. I think the odds make it very difficult to find value on either side here. But if I were to bet this fight, I do think this is a dog or pass matchup. I do think Lainesse gives you the better risk to reward ratio, simply because I just feel it's going to be extremely difficult to make money long term betting on fighters like Malott in this odds range that carry an implied probability of, you know, almost 70% when you know he might only have one good round in him. You know, he lacks experience. His gas tank's not great. Striking's not great. A little bit one-dimensional. Pacing isn't great. There's a lot of issues with Lainesse as well, don't get me wrong, and round one is going to be difficult with, you know, for him with how strong of a grappler Malott is. When you consider the risk to reward ratio that these odds give you, I think you're crazy to bet Malott personally. I do not feel you're putting your money in a strong position. I mean, how do you cap this guy at better than 70%, right? You know, at best you can agree with the odds. To think they're off and to think there's value there, I feel is a really big stretch with Malott's lack of experience, lack of going deep in fights. So for me, Lainesse for sure gives you the better risk to reward ratio. Doesn't mean he'll win, doesn't mean he's more likely to win, but I do feel very hard to make money long term betting MMA, taking guys like Malott in this odds range. Now if we look at this fight in terms of the over-under, I do think this fight is more likely to end inside the distance, just because I think both guys are so dangerous in the areas where they have an edge, that when they're both pretty tired, one of them has a really good chance of finishing the other in their area of expertise. And what I mean by that is, if we know Malott has got a big advantage on the ground, if he can wear Lainesse down with grappling, when both guys are tired, I think Lainesse is going to struggle to be able to defend himself on the ground, so Malott likely gets a finish on the ground. On the flip side, when both guys get tired, if Malott hasn't got the energy to get the fight to the ground, Lainesse is so dangerous on the feet. If Malott is too tired to defend himself on the feet, he's likely going to get himself knocked out. So I do not see this fight go into a decision very often. Unfortunately, the odds reflect that. Unfortunately, the odds are, again, in that 70% odd range. So the odds reflect that. If you really want to bet the over-under on this fight to make it interesting, make watching it interesting, I think your best bet is to probably go for over 1.5 rounds in the even money odds range. That's probably the most attractive over-under to me, because if there is a finish in this fight, I think it's more likely to come in the second half of the matchup when one of these guys gets too tired to defend themselves. They're both very aggressive early, but they both seem reasonably tough as well. But I don't love it, and it's not something I'll be betting myself. That's just for you, action heads that want to, want to play some bets for some action to make watching the fight some more fun. In terms of prop bets on this one, the odds do seem a little short here. They do seem a little tight, a little short. They do seem a little short. If you really want to bet the props, I would go for Lainesse by knockout or TKO. Odds of 4.50 plus 350. It is reasonably likely. I don't love the odds. I won't be betting that myself. Alternatively, you could go for the fight to end in round 3. Again, you guys know me. I just love long shot props. Is that likely to win very often? No, but it doesn't need to. With these odds, you can have an absolutely tiny win rate and still make a decent profit long term. Like, even if you're just hitting, 20% of bets in this odds range, you'd be up huge over the long term. So fight ends in round 3, plus 1,900, 20.0. That's pretty good in my opinion, because if you've got two guys who have really bad gas tanks that are both going to be pretty tired in the third round, one of them has a big advantage on the ground, one of them has a big advantage standing, there's lots of ways you could see that fight finishing, late in the fight when they're both too tired to defend themselves. So yeah, that's probably my favourite prop of all. Fight to end in round 3, 20.0. Yeah, it's a pretty good one. So I hope you found that useful. Now, let's break down the next fight on this card, which is a matchup between two wrestlers, Montana De La Rosa against Tatiana Suarez, making her long-awaited return. And let's take a look at the odds on this fight. So we've got Suarez as an absolutely massive favourite at odds of 1.13, which is minus 769 for an implied probability of 89%. Fuck me, 89%. If we take a look at the odds on Montana De La Rosa, she's around an average of 6.0, which is going to be plus 550 for an implied probability of 15%. So De La Rosa, 28 years old, 5'7", with a 68-inch reach. Tatiana Suarez, 32 years old, 5'5", with a 66-inch reach. So when you look at this matchup, two grapplers, two wrestlers, two with very similar styles, one of them with a better all-round execution of that style than the other, right? Suarez is better than De La Rosa everywhere, which is why she's the big favourite. Let's not beat around the bush. We all know that. The odds tell us the story as to Suarez's advantages in this matchup. But I do think this fight is a really good opportunity to discuss some betting theory that is a little bit thought-provoking, something for us all to think about, and I'd really like to get your thoughts on the debate that I'm going to try and trigger now in the comments below. So, in my opinion, when I look at the odds on this matchup, these odds are completely and utterly ridiculous. They're truly, truly, truly silly. Because when you look at Tatiana Suarez, she hasn't fought in a very long time, coming up to, she hasn't fought since June 2019. So a massive layoff. Last time we saw her fight, she didn't look particularly good either. She struggled to take down Nina Muniz and hold Muniz down in the second half of that fight, which is red flag city with how bad Nunez's takedown defense and ground game is. She also gassed very, very badly. So there are issues with Suarez. There's also ring rust. Now, of course, perhaps she will have used the long layoff to get better, to improve. To improve her cardio, strength and conditioning. Perhaps she would have healed up a lot of the long-term injuries that she's been speaking about. Maybe they were the reasons why she's looked not great in the past in matchups against people like Nina Muniz. But the problem with making that assumption is that when you have a fighter in this odds range, you should research a matchup, and there should be absolutely no doubt in your mind that the big favourite should win. When you have a fighter like Suarez in this odds range that commands an implied probability of 89%, what these odds are saying to me is that this fighter has virtually no way to lose. The only way she's going to lose this fight is if she gets struck by lightning in the octagon, or if a fucking piano falls on her head. Like, it literally should come down to the randomness of MMA in terms of she gets disqualified in the fight, she gets injured in the fight, or, you know, something mental happens, like something crazy happens, like a wild, like, kung fu kick knockout or something that comes out of nowhere, right? Something that just cannot be predicted or foreseen. The randomness of MMA. But those things are very unlikely. And when you research someone like Tatiana Suarez, and you see issues in her last matchup with her gassing out, with her not looking the best with her wrestling, it just really calls into question these odds. It really does. And when you look at these two from a stylistic point of view, it is a difficult fight for Montana De La Rosa, because she's a decent wrestler in the context of the level of MMA that she is fighting in. When we say decent wrestler, we're not putting her on that level of like a Makachev, right? But decent wrestler in terms of the context of the division that she's facing. You look at all the wrestlers in the division she is in, she ain't terrible compared to a lot of the grapplers in the division, right? She's very persistent. She's got decent chain wrestling, you know, reasonably heavy top game, decent submission game. She's a reasonably good grappler. She's not at the level of Tatiana Suarez. There's a lot more physicality to everything that Suarez does. She could generate more drive on her takedowns, heavier top game, better grappling control. She's bigger than Montana De La Rosa, more physically imposing. And I think what I like most about Suarez's ground game is that she's very busy with ground and pound. If you go and watch, you know, any of Suarez's fights, she doesn't stop beating you up on the ground. She's always, you know, trying to beat you up, weigh you down with ground and pound, which is something De La Rosa doesn't do. She favors grappling control over, you know, inflicting damage on the ground. And I think this is one of the reasons why Suarez burns herself out and does gas in fights, because she's always working. She's not one of these grapplers that's going to take you down and just lie on top of you and conserve energy and pace herself. She's constantly attacking with the ground and pound, which takes a lot more energy. And when you ask yourself the question, how does De La Rosa win this fight? It isn't an easy question to answer, because she's unlikely to be able to outstrike Suarez, particularly early on. Suarez is taller, longer, moves better, more athletic. De La Rosa, very bad striking defense, no power in her hands, very flat. So even if the striking was relatively close and competitive, De La Rosa's definitely not going to have an edge there. So it's unlikely De La Rosa wins the fight on the feet. Not like if De La Rosa neutralizes Suarez's grappling, she's going to be able to outstrike her, which is obviously, you know, something that we could say about Nina Muniz, right? You know, if Muniz can keep the fight standing, she's likely to do very well. Same could be said about Alexa Grasso. That's not the case with De La Rosa, right? She's outgunned on the feet, or at the very least equal. When it comes to grappling, it's also tricky, right? When Suarez is fresh early on in the matchup, it's going to be difficult for De La Rosa to keep the fight standing, and if she can, it's not going to be easy for De La Rosa to outwork Suarez when it comes to grappling and score points, because she's going to have to defend the takedowns and fight for her life, whereas Suarez is going to be able to get off those short shots in the clinch, you know, that ground and pound if she gets a takedown, that, you know, attacking when advancing position, looking to take the back, or all that kind of work that we know Suarez is going to be looking to do when forcing De La Rosa to defend herself in grappling exchanges. The point I'm trying to make is De La Rosa is the nail in this fight. She ain't the hammer, at least not early on. Suarez is going to be the hammer. She's going to be the aggressor. She's going to be the one scoring points. And De La Rosa is going to be very defensive, very reactive. So when you consider the matchup in that context, it's a very difficult fight for De La Rosa to win. But when you look at the odds, you're like, these are silly. These are really silly odds. So it's one of those situations where I can't describe to you a path to victory for De La Rosa, but also it's kind of like, if you're a value better, how do you not bet De La Rosa? Right? Because how can you look at Suarez's last performance against Nina Nunes and look at these odds and think these are acceptable? These odds are fucking ridiculous. The problem we've got in MMA at the moment is, on a lot of these events, due to very lazy matchmaking from the UFC, we get a lot of squash matches, right? Not this card. This card is brilliant. This card this weekend's fantastic. But the last few cards we've had have featured a lot of heavy favourites. A lot of the events this year actually have featured a lot of heavy favourites. An example would be last weekend's card, main evented by Blanchfield and Andrade. On last week's card, out of the 11 fights on that card, there were 8 fights that featured a heavy favourite at odds of 1.50, minus 200 or worse. And when we researched each of those matchups, we were saying, look, the favourite deserves to be the favourite, but the favourite is a pretty low-level fighter, right? You look at like Jamal Pogues last weekend. Did Pogues win? Yes. But did the competitiveness of that fight reflect the odds and the price on Pogues, right? Pogues was a massive favourite in that fight, and Parisian made it interesting. Had a good second round, finished the third strong. Once he started to work his way back up to his feet quickly and neutralise the threat of the majority of Pogues' takedowns in the second half of the fight, Parisian came very close to swinging momentum in his favour and winning that matchup. Some people even scored the fight for Parisian. You look at fighters like that, you look at fights like that, and you go, man, those odds are a little bit off. And you go, this fight's probably dog or pass. Because you're getting a terrible risk-to-reward ratio betting someone like Pogues at odds of, 1.25 or minus 400 or whatever his odds were. But the problem with that philosophy is this year, that philosophy would have got you decimated. Decimated. Because if you would have looked at last weekend's fights where you had 8 big favourites on an 11-fight card, almost every one of those big favourites, in my opinion, shouldn't have been that big of a favourite. Almost every single fight out of those 8 heavy favourites were dog or pass situations. Problem is, those big favourites went 8-0. 8-0. So if you were dog hunting, value betting, taking the big dog in each of those 8 matchups, you literally got decimated. And there will be people that will say, yeah, but over the long term, if you keep getting your money into positions like that, that's your edge. I'm not so sure. You look at it this year. If you look at big favourites on the last sort of 4 or 5 cards since the beginning of 2023, I think big favourites are something like 40-3. Very, very few big underdogs have won. And so if you were a value better that were taking all these dog or pass positions, you would have to dig yourself out of a massive hole right now that could potentially take years. It really would be a big hole. If you imagine you only win 3 bets out of like 40, it's a big hole to dig yourself out of. So it's an interesting topic of debate because there's 2 ways to really look at this, and I'm really interested to get your thoughts on this in the comments below. Let me know in the VIP chat room if you're a member of my website. It's a really interesting point of debate and something I'm thinking a lot about lately. And, you can do all the Googling you want. You can read all the articles on this topic you want. Ultimately, you can't pay the mortgage with value. And ultimately, a lot of the guys writing articles on this topic ain't never made no fucking money from gambling in their goddamn lives. That's the brutal reality. And if they have, they've made a little bit. I've made a lot of money gambling over the years, right? If it wasn't for betting restrictions, if it wasn't for account closures on betting MMA, I'd be a millionaire many, many, many years ago. I probably wouldn't even be sat here talking to you now. I'd be extremely wealthy. If it wasn't for the fact that betting accounts get closed, as soon as you make a little bit of profit, I would have been a millionaire an extremely long time ago. Make no mistake, I'm very good at what I do. And over all my years of experience, I'm not sure if on MMA at least, need to contextualize what I'm trying to say. I'm not sure if value betting is actually guaranteed to produce a long-term profit in MMA. And my logic behind this argument is, if you are betting on repeatable outcomes and fixed probabilities, the logic of value betting is mathematically undeniable. Okay? So we know that if you are betting on the flip of a coin, right, the probability is 50-50. So if you say to someone that, you know, we're going to flip this coin 1,000,000 times, and for every $100 you risk on the flip of a coin, when you lose, you pay us 100. When you win, we give you 100 back. We know that over 1,000,000 coin flips, you'll probably roughly break even, right? Because you've got a 1-to-1 risk to reward ratio, right? Roughly 1-to-1 payout. The probability of a coin flip, 50-50. Over the long term, you're going to roughly break even with a 1-to-1 risk to reward ratio, pay off and win. If someone's like, for every time you win, we'll pay you $150. Every time you lose, you pay us 100. Well, you know, over 1,000,000 coin flips, you're very, 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 very likely, almost mathematically certain to make a profit, right? Because you've got that favorable risk to reward ratio. The risk to reward ratio is no longer 1-to-1. You've got an edge over that 50-50 outcome of the coin flip. And people take this philosophy and they apply it to sports betting. They apply it to matchups like Montana De La Rosa and Tatiana Suarez. And they will go, well, due to the randomness and the chaos of MMA, this is a tough fight for De La Rosa. But when you truly understand probability, it's ridiculous to cap Suarez at having a better than 90% chance of winning this fight. You can't do it. I can't do it. I can't fucking do it. These odds are stupid. Make no mistake. These odds are stupid. If you want value, your value's on De La Rosa this weekend. Because Suarez doesn't have a better than 90% chance of winning this. If you really understand probabilities, those odds are straight up stupid. So if you're a value bettor this weekend, De La Rosa is your girl. No doubt about it. The problem you've got with value betting in sports betting, though, is if you bet $100 on De La Rosa this weekend and she gets choked out in 30 seconds, your money is dead in the water, gone forever. You set fire to it, you'll never get it back. But then the same person will be like, well, Alexa Grasso is fighting Valentina Shevchenko next weekend in a similar odds range. I think there's a similar amount of value in Grasso, similar odds range. I'm going to go bet Grasso. Now, that's just an example. I actually think Grasso will get destroyed next weekend, and I do not think there's value on Grasso. Just want to check that out there. I'm using an example. But, the value bettors may see value in Grasso, and they will go, I'm going to go pull the trigger again on Grasso next weekend, or any other fighter. Let's not focus on a specific matchup. Say a similar sort of fight next weekend. Someone like De La Rosa is fighting someone like Suarez in the same odds range. Value bettor will go, I'm betting De La Rosa next week. And she gets taken down, dominated on the ground, loses a decision. The same amount of value is there, but she's lost in a different way. Your money again, dead in the water, set on fire, it's gone. The value bettor is like, there's another fight the week after, similar sort of stylistic matchup, similar sort of fighter, De La Rosa Suarez. They bet the fucking De La Rosa fighter again. This time, De La Rosa gets fucking back taken in round 2 and choked out. She'd have lost again, your money's gone. Point I'm trying to make is, each fight is its own individual thing. It's its own individual event. It is not a repeatable outcome. Montana De La Rosa and Tatiana Suarez will never fight in the Apex Center on the 25th of February. At that time, after that training camp, after that set of injuries, after that weight cut. They will never fight again at this stage in their career. So if you bet that fight and your fighter loses, that money's gone forever. Dead. Fucking gone. You'll never get a chance to win it back. We're not immediately rewinding history in a parallel universe, and under all the same conditions, those fighters are doing it all over again. And you're going to do that a million times until eventually your edge produces a profit. That's not what we're doing here. These are not repeatable outcomes. And Tatiana Suarez is very likely to win this fight. So it's just an interesting debate where you look at it and you go, these odds are stupid. But that doesn't mean if I always bet the big underdog over the long term, I'm going to produce a profit. But I don't know. That's just my opinion. I don't know. From all my years of experience, making a lot of money from betting, not writing articles about betting, not tweeting all day on betting about betting theory and all this shit and the fucking bollocks, people writing, blogging, tweeting. I've made a lot of money betting on sports. Football, made a lot of money betting on football, even more on MMA, right? Like I say, if it wasn't for betting account restrictions on MMA, it would have been a millionaire a very long time ago. I don't know the answer to this question. I don't know. A lot of people talk, a lot of people have strong opinions, and I'm on the fence. I don't know. I don't know. So let me know what you think in the comments below about this fight, because this is a really good talking point in my opinion. I want to talk about it now because big underdogs are getting decimated. And these last few events this year have been very much like boxing cards. And this is very much boxing odds. So let me know what you think, man, in the comments below. I really want to trigger a debate on this. Let's have a discussion. Give me all your opinions, man. Let's find out what's up. All right, that's that matchup donezo. Prop bet City. Let's do it. Prop bet City. Okay. So, if I were going to bet the over-under on this one, I would bet on fight to go to a decision. Purely because, even though Suarez is very aggressive on the ground, De La Rosa can take one hell of a beating. We've seen her take an ungodly amount of damage in her fights against Mayra Bueno Silva, Vivian Araujo, and Andrea Lee. She is not easy to get out there, no matter how badly she is outgunned. She is absolutely tough as nails. She is an absolute dog. She is just an absolute beast. Tough as nails. And on the flip side, not particularly dangerous. So if Suarez were to gas really bad, I don't think De La Rosa is... I mean, she's got a nice submission game. But I think Suarez would have to be super tired for De La Rosa to be able to submit her. So I do see this fight going the distance more often than not. I might actually bet that myself. It's probably my favourite over-under I've seen this week. I don't know if I'm going to be betting it. I don't like to jump into bets on a video. I'll give it some thought. But, you know, I may go for that. If I do end up betting it, obviously I'll let you know via Telegram. If you're not in the Telegram group, come to MMABettingTips.com. Link in the description below. Community, mobile notifications. Join the Telegram group to get notified. Making up fucking words in this video. Notified. You'll be notified whenever I add a new bet to the site. All those notifications are fucking brilliant. Who doesn't love a notified in your fucking face? Get notified, motherfuckers. Alright. Okay. Prop bets. Prop bets. Suarez by decision. Odds are terrible, but that's the most likely outcome. Aside from that, you could be a dirty dog. You could be a maniac and go for Montana De La Rosa to win in round 3 at odds of like 46.0. Plus 4,500. Don't have to have a very high win rate to make a profit betting on bets like that long term, which is completely contrarian to the huge debate in my own head I've just had over value betting. But you know, when the odds are really steep on the most likely outcome, which is Suarez by decision, if you do want to sprinkle a little bit just to watch the fight, make watching the fight more interesting, buy yourself a lottery ticket. Rosa to win in round 3 ain't terrible, considering Suarez is coming in off a long layoff, and she did gas very bad in her last fight against Nina Muniz. And if De La Rosa is down 2 rounds going into the third, and she's facing a tired opponent in Tatiana Suarez, perhaps she will go very aggressively for the submission win. And look, she does, get the sub against tired opponents, I guess. She did it to Ariane Lipski, Nadia Kassem, and Rachel Ostovich with a 3rd round win. So those odds, if you're looking for value, they're very wide to me. I don't mind it as a long shot prop. So I hope you found that breakdown useful. Thank you very much for watching. Let's get into the next fucking fight. Augusto Sakai against Don'Tale Mayes. Sakai is the favourite at average odds of around 1.74, which is going to be minus 135 for an implied probability of 57%. We take a look at the odds on Don'Tale Mayes. He is around an average of 2.15, which is plus 115 for an implied probability of 47%. So both these guys are very, very much in the even money odds range, and the slight lean is towards Augusto Sakai. So Sakai, 31 years old, 6'3" with a 77-inch reach, and Mayes is 31 years old, 6'6" with an 81-inch reach. So both guys roughly the same age, roughly the same size, nothing too notable there. Bit of a 4-inch reach advantage for Mayes, but nothing huge. And this is one of those matchups that I don't have too much of a strong opinion on, which means I kind of agree that these two guys should be in the even money odds range. In a fight like this where I don't really lean heavily either way, I think the best thing for me to do is just explain to you how these two match up from a stylistic point of view, and based on what I've said, you could go do your own research and figure out for yourself who you lean towards in this matchup. I do have a lean on this fight, but it is not a confident one at all. And to be fair, I have absolutely no idea which way this fight goes. So the reason why it is very difficult to predict the outcome of this matchup is because there's nothing either of these guys does particularly well. There's nothing you can look at that either Sakai or Mayes does well that you can see as being the real difference in this matchup. It's not like either of them is a particularly dynamic striker. It's not like either of them is a particularly good grappler. They're both kind of average everywhere, and a big problem they've both had throughout their careers is that they don't do a particularly good job of putting their stamp on rounds, because they don't have any really high level skills to enable them to smoke their opponent in any particular department. When you look at both Mayes and Sakai, they are both pretty industrious in all areas, but because they're just very average, very middle of the road everywhere, almost everyone that both these guys faces is going to be able to hold their own in all areas against them, which is why it makes a lot of sense that these two are in the even money odds range, with the probability of both guys winning being close to 50-50, because they both have a tendency to kind of get into close competitive fights unless they're facing someone far superior to them, which in this instance they're definitely not, because they're both pretty average heavyweights. So a discussion around cardio is always on the table when it comes to heavyweights. It isn't relevant here. They've both got really good cardio for the heavyweight division. In terms of striking, they've got very different styles. So Sakai is more of a flat-footed, plodding, traditional heavyweight that is very heavy, very slow, whereas Mayes is more athletic. He moves around a lot more. He's much lighter on his feet, carries his hand a lot lower. Sakai's more of a volume striker. I'm not going to say Mayes doesn't throw with much volume. He just doesn't throw with as much volume as Sakai. Sakai's the kind of guy that's constantly throwing, constantly working, constantly chipping away at you, but doesn't really have much power in his hands. He's just kind of chipping away at you with volume strikes. Whereas Mayes is a guy that's a little bit more technical, a little bit more flashy, would prefer to, pick his shots a little bit more, rather than just kind of unloading a barrage of volume on you. He's a little bit flashy, a little bit more technical, but he isn't particularly accurate or skilled, so could find himself in a situation where he could get outpointed here from Sakai. The thing with Sakai is doesn't really have any power in his hands, so he really does struggle to get brownie points from the judges because he doesn't really ever damage his opponents that much or land particularly impactful shots. So on the feet, this is like dynamic, fast, flashy striking from Mays. And some of those words are probably a little bit generous towards Mays' skill set, but I'm doing my best to describe the difference between these two. Mays is not an exciting, dynamic striker, but compared to Sakai, he's a lot flashier, a lot more athletic. His movement is a lot better. With Sakai, just a plodding, slow volume striker in the heavyweight division. Sakai also likes to beat guys up in the clinch quite a lot. You know, Mays has got pretty bad fight IQ, so that's maybe an area Sakai can chip away at him and wear him down in the clinch. But yeah, it's one of those fights where it's difficult to gauge. It's difficult to gauge who's going to have the edge on the feet, simply because Sakai isn't the kind of guy that will put his stamp on rounds. Neither's Mays, but Sakai will come with more volume, but Mays can negate a lot of that volume with explosive, impactful shots. When it comes to grappling, both of these guys are very bad grapplers. They're both very weak off their back. They both have very bad takedown defense. Neither of them are particularly good offensive wrestlers either. Out of the two, Mays is more likely to look for a takedown. You'll very rarely see Sakai try to take his opponents down. But out of the two, Sakai is far better at working his way back up to his feet than Mays is. Sakai is one of these fighters, a little bit like Derek Lewis, a little bit like Jessica Andrade, who is very difficult to hold down early in a matchup. If you take Sakai down early, he's very good at popping back up to his feet pretty quickly. But if you chain wrestle, if you grapple hard, if you wear him down, he becomes a lot easier to hold down. Mays isn't really that kind of grappler, so probably doesn't mean anything in the context of this fight. But yeah, just be aware that both these are very, very weak off their back. But Mays is more likely to look for a takedown. So if Mays looks for a takedown and does get on top of Sakai, it's obviously a big issue for Sakai that he's weak off his back. It's not as big of an issue for Mays if it's not as big of an issue for Mays that he's weak off his back if Sakai doesn't even try to take him down, right? That's the point I'm trying to make. So, in terms of my lean on this matchup, my lean is towards Sakai, just purely because I feel he has slightly better fight IQ and decision making, and he does fight at a high pace and throw a good volume. He doesn't do anything particularly well with that volume, but he is constantly working, whereas Mays has a tendency to have some, bad fight IQ and really passive performances at times. So my slight lean is Sakai, because with him being the busier fighter, there's a reasonably good chance he outworks Mays over 3 rounds. But I say that with very minimal confidence, because skill for skill, neither of these guys has a huge edge anywhere. And I do think it is very likely to be a competitive fight that could go either way, which is why they're both in the even money odds range. My lean is towards Sakai, but like very, very marginally. I wouldn't feel all that confident Sakai is going to win this weekend. In terms of prop bets on this matchup, we can see that the odds are underdog odds actually on fight to go to decision. I may bet that actually. Neither of these are particularly dangerous heavyweights. They don't really have any power in their hands. They're not particularly dangerous on the ground. You can see that Mays has got a habit of going deep in fights. His last 3 fights have gone very deep. In fact, if you look at his last 5 fights, 4 out of his last 5 almost went to a decision. When you look at Sakai, obviously a lot of his fights have been ended inside the distance, but that's because he's been getting finished by dangerous opponents, of which Mays is not that dangerous. When Sakai was facing a lower level of opponent, his fights were going deep. You see there, fight went into round 3 against Sherman, went the distance with Arlovsky, and also the distance with Ivanov. So I actually think that's a pretty good bet. Fight goes to a decision on this one at dog odds. If I were capping this, I'd actually cap this fight going to decision at like 55-60%. And if you look at the implied probability on those odds, they carry an implied probability of 40%. So you're getting a pretty good margin there from when I cap it. I do like that bet quite a bit. I would take that. I think there's probably a little bit of wiki capping going on there. Odds makers, the public, are looking at the records of both these guys, seeing that, Sakai doesn't go to a decision very often, seeing some finishes for Mays and thinking, ends inside the distance, without considering how both guys match up stylistically. I don't think a finish is actually particularly likely in this matchup. So when you take a look at the prop bets on this fight, the one that jumps out to me would be Sakai to win by decision, just purely outworking Mays with more volume over the 3 rounds. Odds on that are okay, I guess. I won't be betting it myself, but if you do want to bet a prop on this fight to make watching it more interesting, I think Sakai by decision is your best bet. So I hope you found that breakdown useful. Now let's break down the fight between Andre Muniz and Brendan Allen, which is an extremely interesting fight. A very complex matchup with a lot to think about, and certainly one of the most interesting fights on the card. What makes this a really complex fight and a very interesting matchup is that both of these guys are deeply, deeply flawed. They both have huge issues within their skill set, and each of them is particularly well positioned to exploit the other's weakness. So Allen has a huge weakness that we're going to be talking about, and Muniz's strength is exploiting people with that weakness. But Muniz also has a big weakness, and Allen is specifically well positioned to cause Muniz problems in that area. And we're going to be talking about these issues shortly, but first let's start off by taking a look at the odds. Now, there's a lot of hype on Muniz at the moment. You tend to see this when a guy is on a decent winning streak. He's got some names over some big opponents like Jacare and Uriah Hall, and he's got a lot of quick finishes, which people tend to love. So there is a lot of hype on Muniz, and I do feel that to some extent that hype is influencing the odds. Should he be this big of a favourite? I'm not so sure. We'll talk about it. But nonetheless, he is a 1.45 favourite, which is minus 222 for an implied probability of 69%. If we take a look at the odds on Brendan Allen, he is around an average of 2.80, which is plus 180 for an implied probability of 36%. Muniz is 33 years old, 6'1" with a 78-inch reach. Brendan Allen, 27 years old, 6'2" with a 75-inch reach. So no major X factors for us to dig into there. So this is a classic striker versus grappler matchup where Muniz is the far superior grappler, Allen the far superior striker. But I guess the difference is Allen is a lot more well-rounded than Muniz. If this fight were to stay standing, which I doubt it will, but if it were to stay standing, you'd think Allen would have a pretty big advantage over Muniz, whereas if it goes to the ground, Muniz is likely going to have the edge. Now, a big part of our assessment in how this fight is likely to play out is going to be describing the major weaknesses that both these guys have, and then considering the probability of either guy exploiting the other's weakness to try and figure out which one of these guys, from a betting point of view, is going to give us the better risk to reward ratio. Now, when you look at Andre Muniz's striking, he's a big, heavy, clunky middleweight. He doesn't move particularly well, but he does land hard, impactful strikes. But he's not a comfortable striker. He doesn't want to be on the feet. This guy wants to be on the ground, and when he's standing up and striking, he's quite inactive because he doesn't want to waste any energy, exerting energy going for takedowns, only to, burn through energy that probably isn't going to produce particularly good results with him not being, that great of a striker. Allen, on the other hand, his striking's not the best, but he is very aggressive. He does stay busy. He does throw a high volume of strikes, and while he's pretty bad defensively, he's relatively tough, and he's got a decent kicking game. He lands hard, nasty, impactful strikes. If this matchup were to stay standing, I do feel extremely confident Allen would win very comfortably, simply because Muniz is not going to be able to match the volume that Allen can put out there. Allen is a cardio machine. He can go hard for 3 rounds. This guy could fight at a very high pace, and Muniz is just not going to be able to match that. He's a heavy, clunky, slow, single shot power striker, and with him not being a particularly dangerous striker, even though Allen's bad defensively, I'm not saying Muniz can't catch Allen with a big shot, but Allen's going to be able to out-hustle Muniz and best him on the feet. Now, when it comes to grappling, this is a very complex fight, because there's no doubt that Muniz is the better grappler out of the two. There's no doubt that Muniz is much more skilled on the ground, and if this were a BJJ contest, I'm confident Muniz would tie Allen up in knots and do terrible things to him. But it is not a BJJ contest. This is a mixed martial arts contest, and in a mixed martial arts contest, an MMA fight, there are ways Allen can make this very interesting on the ground. So when I look at Andre Muniz's performances in the UFC, I do get strong Rodolfo Vieira vibes. There are a lot of similarities between Muniz and Vieira in the sense that their striking is serviceable. Vieira is certainly a better striker than Muniz, but it is serviceable. They can hold their own on the feet against most guys. Both of them are pretty good offensive wrestlers for guys with bases in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Muniz does a pretty good job of driving in deep on the legs and hips of his opponents when searching for takedowns. Muniz has got good grappling control, a heavy top game, high-level Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, nasty submission game, very, very similar to Vieira. And Muniz's problem is that the more he grapples, the faster he gets tired, which is a huge issue because grappling is Muniz's bread and butter, but the more of his bread and butter that he kind of eats, the fuller he gets, and the less effective he is at eating. What a terrible analogy. But anyway, the point I'm trying to make is Muniz starts out very, very formidable on the ground with good offensive wrestling, good grappling control, great Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. But if you can weather that early storm against Muniz, his grappling becomes significantly less effective. And I would go as far as saying that Muniz's cardio is fucking terrible. If you go back and watch his fights against both Uriah Hall and also Antonio Araujo, two fights that went deep, he gassed extremely bad in both matchups, but was saved in both fights by the inability of his opponents to make him pay for those weaknesses. In the case of Antonio Araujo, Araujo also gassed really bad, so he wasn't able to fully capitalize. And in the case of Uriah Hall, well, Hall's fight IQ and takedown defense was so bad that even when Muniz was very, very, very tired, he still had just enough energy to get hold of the ground and put him in some bad positions. The question here is going to be how well Muniz is going to be able to do against Brendan Allen when he gets tired, considering the fact that Allen is reasonably skilled on the ground, a lot more skilled than Uriah Hall, and on top of that has extremely good cardio and will not get tired. So when you look at how these two match up skill for skill when it comes to grappling, it is a bad stylistic matchup for Allen in the sense that if Muniz could perform for 3 rounds how he performs for 1 round, I mean, you'd be looking at utter domination here, right? Muniz would absolutely dominate. He would rack up 10-8 rounds. This would not be a contest because Allen's biggest weakness is that he is very weak off his back. You go back, watch his fight against Jacob Malkoun as an example. Malkoun, nowhere near the grappler that Andre Muniz is. He's just a wrestle boxer from Australia. Ground game, nothing special. Yet he was able to take Allen down, hold him down for long periods relatively easily. And if you look at that fight, you go, well, how much better Muniz is on the ground, this fight should be a cakewalk. But the real difference between Muniz and Malkoun is that Malkoun is perhaps not as good of a grappler as Muniz, that goes without saying, but Malkoun can grapple relatively effectively for longer. Malkoun has the gas tank to go hard for 3 rounds. After round 1, Muniz's grappling becomes significantly less effective. If Muniz is a high-level black belt in round 1, he's probably a brown belt in round 2, and by the 3rd round, probably a purple belt. That's where I'm trying to go with this. His cardio is truly god-awful. And so this matchup is interesting because Allen is a total buzzsaw. Remember earlier on we were talking about both guys possessing the ability to exploit the other's biggest weakness. And in the context of Muniz, the reason why he can exploit Allen's biggest weakness is that Allen's takedown defense isn't good, and Muniz's offensive wrestling is. And Allen's very, very weak off his back, super weak off his back, in fact. And Muniz has got a very heavy top game. So you look at that and you go, well, Muniz should be able to get this fight to the ground relatively easily when both guys are fresh. And when he gets on top of Allen, he's going to be able to rack up top control pretty easily. And I would expect that to happen certainly early in this fight. So that's how Muniz can exploit Allen's biggest weakness. But when you look at Muniz's biggest weakness being the fact that he gasses out significantly after round 1, Allen is an absolute buzzsaw. He is constantly engaging you, constantly forcing you to work. When you're on the feet striking, he's constantly attacking you, forcing you to engage. When you're on the ground, he's always attacking off his back, trying to create scrambles, trying to attack with submissions and force you to work. Yes, he isn't the best off his back, but he's still relatively active. And so Muniz is going to have to exert energy to hold Allen down, to get the takedowns, to control him. And while I do think Muniz is likely to do very well early in the fight, when he starts to slow with how aggressive and how high Allen's work rate is, I think he can really make the second half of this fight very competitive, very interesting if it goes that deep. A weakness that both these guys share on the ground is that they are both overly aggressive on the ground. They both are guys that will risk dominant positions for submissions, which isn't good because they do have a tendency to give up dominant positions at critical moments in fights. So, for example, if Allen's in top position and there's a minute left to go in the round, he might, try and advance the mount and get reversed, or, he might start working for an armbar and end up on the bottom. Muniz is exactly the same. And perhaps that favours Muniz because he's the more experienced grappler that's less likely to make these mistakes than Allen, who's quite green, quite raw on the ground and gets overly excited, over aggressive and gives up position at really, really bad times. But they both do this, which means on the ground you could see a situation where both of them are quite prone to imploding and they both have quite bad grappling IQ, to be honest with you, in the context of MMA grappling, particularly Muniz, because Allen is one of these crazy, wild, chaotic dudes that pushes a high pace. And so when he gives up position on the ground, attacking and being overly aggressive, it's not good because he's made a bad decision. But he does have the energy to continue fighting, get himself out of trouble at times. When Muniz gets overly aggressive and gives up position, he's often had to exert what little energy he has to obtain the position in the first place. And then when he gives it up, he's burnt through a lot of energy to not necessarily achieve a lot. And then he has to exert even more energy to get that position back. So both of them have very bad grappling IQ in different ways. So what does this mean in the context of this fight? Well, for me, you are a crazy person if you bet Andre Muniz at these odds. Could he dominate Allen from top position for 3 rounds? Absolutely. Could he submit Allen very quickly? Of course he can. This is MMA. These things can happen. But what I would say about Muniz is exactly what I would say about someone like Mike Malott this week. In the sense, and Trevor Peake actually, in the sense that all of Muniz's advantages in this fight are fully baked into the odds. If you can look at Muniz's odds that carry an implied probability of 70% and find value here, I just don't know what to tell you. If you can watch, the Uriah Hall fight and the Antonio Araujo fight, and then any of Brendan Allen's fights, and tell me you find value at an implied probability of 70%, then best of luck to you, man, because you are seeing things in the universe that I am unable to see. But I do feel Muniz just is not the one, man. I know there's a lot of hype behind him. I know there are a lot of things that he does which can cause Brendan Allen big problems. We've identified those. But even though there are a lot of things that Muniz can do to cause Allen problems, you can't ignore Muniz's weaknesses that Allen could potentially exploit. So for me, there is absolutely no doubt that this is a dog or pass fight. if you really want to bet this fight this weekend, you have to take Allen. The problem if you bet Allen is that you are betting on a guy who is very weak off his back against a strong grappler, a guy that gives up position a lot on the ground against a very skilled grappler, and a guy that has bad fight IQ. Is the value on Allen this weekend? Absolutely, it is undeniable. But you are not putting your money in a strong position, and a position that is particularly likely to win, simply because Allen's biggest weakness tends to be Muniz' biggest strength. Now, the same goes for Muniz, to be fair. Allen's great cardio, high work rate, those are the guys that will cause Muniz a problem. But what that essentially means is no matter who you bet in this fight, you're not putting your money in a particularly safe or strong position. You get a better risk to reward ratio taking Allen because the payoff is better, but it doesn't mean you're particularly likely to win. So I hope you found that useful. Now, in terms of the over-under on this one, I do think this fight is more likely not to go to a decision. Just because Muniz has got a very dangerous submission game and Allen's quite green on the ground. Muniz also gets really tired in fights, so maybe Allen gets a finish late on. But purely for value, if you do want to bet the over-under on this fight, I do think fight goes to a decision gives you a better risk-to-reward ratio. My theory being, Brendan Allen is pretty tough. If you take a look at his record, he's only been finished 5 times in 25 pro fights. He's not easy to put away. You can see he's been to a decision many times in the past. Muniz is a dangerous submission grappler, but if he doesn't get a submission in round 1, he very rarely manages to finish his opponent. You can see his fights basically either finish in round 1 or go to a decision. This is because he's very dangerous in round 1, but when he gasses in the second, significantly less dangerous. So, in my opinion, Allen is very tough, difficult to finish. Muniz only is really dangerous in round 1, so if Allen can make it through round 1, his chances of surviving go up exponentially, which increase the probability of this fight going to a decision. On top of that, Muniz is one of these guys that isn't easy to finish. If he does start to gas and does start to struggle to defend himself, we saw in the Antonio Araujo fight that he's very tricky and crafty, and he will use the tactic that many BJJ guys have done over the years to defend themselves when they get tired. Think about the Damian Mayers, the Rani Yayas, the Fabrizio Verdums, even the Paul Craigs. When these BJJ guys like Muniz get tired, it's very difficult to put them away because every time they sense danger on the feet, they'll look to pull guard or flop to their back and fake a knockdown. So I do think it is reasonably likely this fight goes the distance. Of course it could end by quick submission, but in terms of risk to reward ratio, I think the fight goes to decision gives you the much better risk to reward ratio than this at heavy favourite odds. The carries an implied probability of about 70%. You don't want to touch that. Now, in terms of prop bets on this one, Muniz by submission, very steep odds. I would not go near that. Barely better than even money on that. The odds are too short for such a specific outcome. The other prop I would be interested in is Allen by decision, or Muniz by decision. Whoever you think is going to win this fight, I would just go by decision on that. If you really want to bet a prop to make watching this one more interesting. Yeah, that's that for this fight. I hope you found that useful. Please let me know in the comments below who you think will win. I know a lot of people have got a lot of strong opinions on that fight, so I'm probably going to get heavily criticised for my analysis. That's just how I see it, and I feel it's probably pretty accurate. If you do your own research, you'll probably see similar things to me. So now let's break down the main event on this card, which is going to be Nikita Krylov versus Ryan Spann. So Krylov is the favourite at average odds of around 1.57, which is minus 175 for an implied probability of 64%. If we take a look at the odds on Ryan Spann, he is around an average of 2.45, which is going to be plus 145 for an implied probability of 41%. Krylov is 30 years old, 6'3", with a 77.5 inch reach. Spann, 31 years old, 6'5", with an 81.5 inch reach. So a bit of a size and reach advantage for Spann. Nothing huge, 4-inch reach advantage. But to be fair to Spann, he doesn't use his reach particularly well, apart from with his nice, cheeky chokes. His choking game is very nasty. Aside from that, doesn't use his reach particularly well when it comes to striking, just loads up on big winging power shots. Now, Spann is the kind of fighter that, in my opinion, you can't bet on because of how much weaknesses he has, but at the same time, you can't bet against because of how dangerous he is. Spann is one of these guys that has a kill or be killed style, and he's very dangerous everywhere. For the most part, he comes out the gate super hard, super aggressive, trying to kill everyone in round one. He has devastating knockout power in his strikes, a very nasty, cheeky, dangerous submission game, and that makes him a dangerous opponent for literally anyone in the division. There's no one in the division that you can look at and say, you know, they'd be absolutely fine against Ryan Spann, simply because he's very dangerous. He commits so hard to everything that he throws that he can knock anyone out in the division with one shot, and he's very, very good at jumping on nasty chokes and putting you away before you have a chance to react. So Spann is extremely hard to bet against. He's also very difficult to bet on because he is sloppy, he is wild, he is reckless, he's weak off his back, he's got bad striking defense. He's one of these guys that has bad fight IQ, bad decision making. He can't be trusted. So Spann is the kind of guy that is an MMA bettor's nightmare, really, because you can never depend on him, you can never trust on him to get the job done, but you can also never count him out either because of how dangerous he is. In my opinion, from a technical point of view, Nikita Krylov is better than Ryan Spann in every single aspect of MMA. He's got a base in Kyokushin karate, so he's a lot more technical than Spann on the feet. His footwork's better, his movement better, his technique's better, his combos are better. Spann is like a wild, reckless, aggressive power puncher, but there's very little method to the madness. There's very little technique behind what Ryan Spann does. So at distance, Krylov should be the superior, more technical striker, should be able to pick Spann apart and outpoint him. When it comes to wrestling, Krylov also has better offensive wrestling, better chain wrestling, better takedown defense. He's better off his back. Spann is a far more dangerous submission grappler than Krylov, but Spann makes a lot of bad decisions on the ground that get him in trouble. Krylov, though, out of the two, probably has the worst cardio, and this is a 25-minute fight. Neither of these guys are like cardio machines or anything like that, but Krylov does have a tendency to slow down, and Krylov's one of these guys that if you force him to grapple, he will get tired really, really quickly. So if you do see a lot of grappling in this fight, you know, expect Krylov to gas pretty bad off the back of that. So this is one of those matchups where, in my opinion, you look at the odds, you do the fight research, and you're like, yeah, bookies absolutely nailed the odds on this one. It is what it is. Krylov deserves to be the favourite because he's slightly better than Spann everywhere, to be fair. So that makes him the rightful favourite. But you can't count Spann out because of how dangerous he is. So the odds are reasonably playable on both. They're a little bit trappy. I don't think you're getting a strong position on either side. You're crazy if you feel confident on either one of these guys, in my opinion. This one is an easy pass with how dangerous Spann is, but also how flawed he is. Very, very difficult fight to bet. I'd be very surprised if this fight went the distance. I think the fact both guys slow down a lot as fights wear on, and the fact that both guys are so dangerous makes it very unlikely this fight goes the distance. If we're looking at the sweet spots on over-unders, I don't know, man. I don't know, actually. I don't know. I don't really like any of the over-unders on this one. I don't like them because, obviously, you look at Spann, right? He has that kill or be killed style. Most of his fights end in round one. So that could get you interested in the under 1.5 rounds. But then this is his first 5-round fight. So he may start slower, maybe a little bit more cautious than usual. In order to pace himself over 5 rounds. I use the example of Johnny Walker when he made his first main event against Thiago Santos, right? Everyone was expecting Santos and Walker to go to war early and for there to be a quick finish. But with it being Walker's first 5-rounder, he fought a lot safer, a lot more cautiously than usual, which resulted in the fight going the distance. And you could see the same thing happening here with Krylov and Spann. So I don't really like any of these over-unders. I would pass on them if I were you personally. In terms of prop bets, there's so many ways this fight could go. Yeah, I don't like any of the props on this one. For me, it's very difficult to find value on props on this fight because there are so many variables. I could see Spann knocking Krylov out or submitting him. I could see Krylov knocking Spann out or submitting him. And yeah, it's tricky. It's tricky. Very tricky fight to bet. So it's a fantastic card this weekend. Absolutely brilliant. Loads of interesting fights. The main event, not the most interesting. Plenty of other excellent fights for us to get our teeth into. If you're going to be betting the fights this weekend, good luck. I hope you crush it. I hope you found the information in this video useful. And if you want, breakdown videos for all the prelim fights on this card, there's a strategy guide to help you make money betting these fights this weekend. Head on over to my website, MMABettingTips.com. Of course, do your own research, gamble responsibly. But, I put in the same amount of work on all the prelim fights I do on the main card fights. And I'm sure you'll find those breakdowns useful if you found these ones useful. So, thank you very much for watching. Come back tomorrow where I'll be dropping a breakdown video for Jake Paul versus Tommy Fury. Thank you very much for watching. Have a great weekend. Take care, everyone. Love you all. Bye.